Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming and giving your time and coming to this conference quite early in the morning. I'm glad I can speak first, so I hope you're all still attentive and ready to get a little bit of input. I was introduced as a speech. I hope it's more considered as a little input to this day, which I think is immensely important, and just sharing a little bit from the experience that we at the center have together with many other organizations who are working on family-friendly policies and making business more family-friendly, and just sharing a couple of points on that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what do we mean, just that we are all kind of having a joint or a clear definition on what we mean when we say family-friendly policies, and also what the key drivers are. So why does business engage in this? I mean, this is not entirely new, and I think in the couple of last year we've seen more and more business engaging in family-friendly policies, but then also how to make sure that we do this, that we do the right activities and that we do them right. And I think that last point probably is going to be the most important. So just quickly, generally family-friendly policies are defined as kind of the ability of workers to reconcile work and family responsibility. So that's the very general kind of definition of it. In the work that we have been doing at the center, together with Save the Children, but also together with UNICEF, we felt it was really important to add that second element to this definition, and that it is that it creates increased well-being for the development and development of the children of workers. So it's not just about the parents themselves or the workers themselves, it's also the impact this has on children, and that we should look at the activities and how impactful or how meaningful they are, also based on does it increase the well-being of children. So we added this second part. This is in a joint definition that is put into a research brief that has been written by UNICEF and the center. Now, just what these activities are generally, when we talk about them and look at them a little bit from an academic perspective, we put them into three different groups, and that is time, resources, and services. So that means that employers give to their employees, to their staff, increased time. That can be a message such as parental leave, breaks for breastfeeding, flexible working hours arrangements. So I once visited a factory in Thailand that had those great working hours that were totally around the schools nearby and allowed the parents to pick up their children from school, spend a little bit of time with them, and then continue their shift. So it was all the same thing in the morning. It ensured that the shifts were adapted to the school hours. So that's just an example. Then it's often also resources. That means finding resources of employment protection, but also breastfeeding facilities and wider support that the company gives. Financial resources if companies, for example, engage in child benefits for the children of their workers, or maybe the children of their most vulnerable workers, etc. That is kind of resources that the company is putting forward in their time. And then the last and probably biggest area is the services, for example, childcare support or setting up your own child-friendly space, etc. is family-friendly kind of activities where the company is creating services for their employees and their families. Another example is many bigger companies do have some sort of health service, and we've seen, for example, we worked with a couple of factories in Bangladesh who, particularly during COVID, opened those health services to all their families, like to the children and husbands or spouses of their employees, to really increase the benefit. So this is just a couple of examples or how we generally do that. Now, why does business engage? There's a couple of research papers out there, and one big driver, for good or for bad, is compliance. And I'm saying for good and for bad because obviously sometimes when we're very compliance-driven, it can easily get into ticking a box and just making sure we are on the right side of the law. But it's also for good because I'm actually always impressed to how well businesses generally are in following policies and legal advice. They're sometimes better than the governments themselves in doing so. So if you have a law in a country that tells you we have minimum maternity leave of, let's say, 14 weeks, I think that's the, is that the Sri Lanka? Okay, anyways, I can't hear. Anyways, whatever your rule is, then the businesses generally do follow that rule, particularly formal businesses. It's very rare that they would say, oh no, we're not following that rule, we're just giving 8. And there is, research has shown a clear spillover effect to the informal sector. And so, for example, the legal provisions around maternity leave are a single or a kind of the strongest number one factors in improved time of lactation in all countries when you look at it from a high level perspective. So what that means is that the countries who do have longer maternity leaves set into their legal provisions do much better in terms of how long children are being breastfed. And that's for everyone, even in economies where a majority of the people work in informal jobs. Because that expectation that you're taking leave and that you're not going back a week after is actually something that spills over from the formal businesses and the formal sector to the informal sector. So that's very encouraging, and as such I think very encouraging also for governments to really put up legal and legislation that businesses can follow, but that also then really create a change. There's a lot of business benefits, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit in a second. What is very interesting, though, I think that research has shown that business benefits, so if I'm telling you, you will make more money, it will have a good positive impact on your profit if you implement family-friendly policies. If that doesn't align with your values, it turns out it's not that of a convincing factor for businesses. So businesses who have very strong values, where the leadership puts forward very strong values about, for example, family, or we want to be a family-friendly business, we want to create positive impact in community, and that is what business has been kind of saying all over, then the benefits are a nice to have. But research has shown that businesses who don't define themselves as such will not be convinced just because somebody puts a number in front of them and says, look, you will actually make more money if you follow that family-friendly policies. Because a lot of our actions are probably, unfortunately, much less rational than what we think sometimes. And sometimes there's a lot of fear of businesses to make that extra step. They're worried, oh, I'm going to be taken advantage of, or the workers will take advantage of that, or they will work less. And if we have this fear, it's actually something that we learned. A lot of times we have to work on the value basis and not always so much on the business basis. I'm not saying the business case is not important, and I'm just going to make a couple of points why it's important. But these things need to come together. If we just, it doesn't seem to work effectively from a research perspective if we only rely on the business benefits. So what are those benefits? So I think it's really important to remember those. So research has clearly shown that increased gender equality is actually linked to increased corporate performance, and that's very international. That's in different in different economies. This is the same. In different industries, this is the same. And interestingly, or obviously family-friendly policies have shown to be a very good tool to increase equality if it's done right, and I will say something to that as well. Work-life balance is number one kind of value that many people put into what they're looking for in a job. So the time where, just eventually a big kind of a paycheck, but that comes at the cost of a 70-hour week, is acceptable to most people, seems to be nearly over in most economies. So most people are obviously they're looking for good conditions and good salaries, but they're also looking for this life-work balance. And what I've often discussed with many business leaders is really that understanding that when business shows that they care for the families of their children, or of their workers and the children of their workers, business shows their employees that they care about the things that the employee, him or herself, cares most about as well. Right? If you think of the drive that we have often to go to work every morning, particularly if your job is maybe not the most passionate job in the world, the drive for that is your family. It's the belief that you can create something for your family, that you can get your children to school, that you can maybe create a bit of a better future for them, etc. That's what drives them. And when employers show I also care about that, then that creates a very strong connection and a really strong improvement also in employee satisfaction and trust into the management of that company. So there's very strong kind of evidence around that. And then lastly, family-friendly policy have actually very strong benefits in terms of health and well-being effectiveness. So I already put the example of maternity leave that has a direct link to the health of newborn babies in countries. But then there is also a clear, quite direct link in terms of productivity and effectiveness. And there have been some studies that certain of the family-friendly policies really improve their productivity. One family-friendly policy that has shown to be really important in that point is sick leave for parents. And you might think, oh no, but then they're off work even more often, and so I might lose their productivity or personal effectiveness. But it has actually shown that it reduces stress of parents to such a degree when they know if my child is sick, I can take leave. That reduces stress to the degree that it makes them much more productive and motivated on the days when they are there, and reduces a lot of the stress in the workforce. And because that sentiment, if you're at work and your child is homesick, creates a very negative kind of feeling and relationship to work. I think we all can associate with that. And that lingers, right? That lingers on the next day. Even if the child's better again, it just lingers on. And so this is one of the activities that's proven very important or very effective in also increasing productivity. Now I'm going to finish with 3 points, it's always 3 points, on things we need to be very mindful of. And so there is such a thing that is called mummy trap. What we mean with the mummy trap is that if you create a lot of family-friendly policies that only cater to women, so for example, period leave, that seems to be a thing sometimes, which seems to assume that every woman has an issue with that and needs to take 2 days off, which I think most women would agree is not necessarily the case. For some of us it's necessary, but not for all. Or if that sick leave that you're giving, like taking sick leave for the children, is given only to women. Then and also if maternity leave gets very, very long, there is some studies in Sweden where they can have up to 2 years maternity leave. It can actually reinforce gender inequality because you're putting the women in this position, you're foremost a mother, and only secondly you will do some stuff at your work. And that will mean that afterwards in the leadership, we'll have much less women. We have seen it in many places because actually what hinders equality a lot of times for women is the unpaid work that they're doing at home. We've been talking to women that were in a project in Bangladesh. I'm sorry for those to whom I told this story yesterday, who were in a project in Bangladesh where the goal of the project was to get more women supervisors into the factories. And the women didn't want to become supervisors. They were like joining the trainings, they seemed to be capable, but then when the management asked them, they were like, no. And then in the project report it says, well, it seems that being a supervisor is not a women's thing. And obviously my whole body reacted to that, it's like, that can't be. And so we looked into that. And the point was that these women were just exhausted. They all got up at 4 a.m. in the morning. They prepared the meals for all their families, for the free meals during the day. Then they took a long commute to the factories. They also got the kids ready before that to school. They take long commutes to the factories. They come home late. Because they had done the financial training in the factories as well, they were the ones responsible to keep the financing in order in the house. They were doing homework with their children, and they were doing all the household chores. So when then the management came and said, would you like to be a supervisor and take on a little bit more responsibility, and maybe that also leads to a bit longer working hours? Obviously, these women were not interested. They're like, I can't take it. This is too much for me. And so it's really important when we do that. And one of the ways, for example, is doing that is, how can we, for example, get the husbands more engaged? We've been starting doing we did a long time, we did parenting training. We now start to do more and more fathers training. And that's just to get them more involved in what's going on at home. And because that will help us to create more quality, and not necessarily special policies for women, but just increasing that quality. So that's, I think, a really important point. Another important point is that often family-friendly policies refer to us white-collar workers. And we think, so for example, work-life balance, we immediately think of the guy in the office or the woman in the office who needs that. But as a lot of research and experience has shown, this is as applicable to kind of blue-collar workers to low-skilled job. We have seen in programs that we did in factories where we increased child-friendly spaces for migrant workers, that activity where they could bring their children during summer vacation into factory childcare or kind of summer campish activities had increased productivity and satisfaction enormously for those workers because it was such a big added value. And there's a couple of other studies out there from UNICEF as well that shows this work-life balance is not just important for people with higher level of education, etc. It's important for also low-skilled jobs and has a very strong benefit on businesses as well in a low-skilled job. And then the last one, and that's a little bit connected, not all family policies do have an immediate business impact, right? It's not all of them where you can say, oh, you know, I did this now, I'm doing parenting training, and then immediately your productivity somehow goes up and you're making more money. That's unfortunately not how it works. I think many of those things are long-term. And there is a big risk that sometimes when, and we've seen this unfortunately during COVID, that companies, when they were pushed, suddenly started to drop things. And we're like, okay, let's drop everything that is nice to have, and we just have to focus on the business because they were just seeing this immediate kind of economic pressure, which I understand. I'm also running a small, but still I'm running a business, so I can kind of really identify with that pressure that you have. But what we've seen is that companies who stick to it and who stick to those values throughout the crisis do often then come out of stronger. And I think very much we need a long-term thinking in this perspective. And it's about the long-term health and longevity of the company, and not just about your immediate, results at the end of the month. So that's 3 points, I think, when we discuss more family-friendly policies today, that hopefully we can remember and discuss a little bit more. Thank you all so much.